The RP-3 was a British rocket projectile used during and after the Second World War, though primarily an air-to-ground weapon. Its or limited use in other roles. Its 60-pound warhead gave rise to the alternative name of the 60-pound rocket. The 25-pound solid-shot armor-piercing variant was referred to as the 25-pound rocket. They were generally used by British fighter-bomber aircraft against targets such as tanks, trains, motor transport and buildings, and by coastal command and Royal Navy aircraft against U-boats and shipping. The 3-inch designation referred to the diameter of the rocket motor tube. History. The first use of rockets fired from aircraft was during World War I. The unrotated projectiles were RP-3 rockets which were mounted on the interplane struts of Nieuport fighters. These were used to attack observation balloons and were reasonably successful. Sopwith Baby and Pup and Home Defense B.E.2 fighters also carried rockets. With the war ended, the Royal Air Force, intent on retrenching, forgot about firing rockets from aircraft. The British Army, however, did see a use for rockets against low-flying aircraft. From late 1940, parts of Britain were defended by increasing numbers of Z batteries, 2-inch rockets supplementing the conventional anti-aircraft guns. When German forces under the command of Rommel intervened in the Western Desert from early 1941, it became clear that the Desert Air Force lacked weapons capable of damaging and destroying the large numbers of armored fighting vehicles, particularly the heavier Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks possessed by the Germans. Consequently, in April 1941, Henry Tizard, the chief scientist, called together a panel to study methods of attacking armored vehicles. The types of weapons investigated included the 40mm Vickers S gun and related weapons manufactured by the Coventry Ordnance Works, as well as the 40mm Bofors and the US 37mm T9 cannon fitted to the Bell P-39 Airacobra. However, it was already recognized that these weapons were only capable of dealing with light tanks and motor transport, and using larger weapons on fighter bombers was ruled out because of weight and difficulties handling recoil. The chairman of the panel, Mr. Ivor Bowen, turned to the idea of using rocket projectiles as a means of delivering a large warhead capable of destroying or disabling heavy tanks. Information was sought from the Soviets, who had just started using unguided RS-82 rockets against German ground forces in the opening phases of Operation Barbarossa. By September 1941, it was decided that two models of UP would be developed, a 23-pound plastic explosive on a standard 2-inch UP, a 20-pound solid armor-piercing head on a 3-inch UP. When it was realized that the 2-inch version would be less effective than the Vickers S cannon, it was decided to concentrate on development of the 3-inch version, which could be developed from the 2-inch rocket used in the Z batteries. Design. The rocket body was a steel tube 3 inches in diameter filled with 11 pounds of cordite propellant, fired electrically. The warhead was screwed into the forward end, and was initially a solid 25 pounds, 3.44-inch armor-piercing shell which was quickly supplemented by a 6-inch diameter, 60 pounds high explosive head. Another type of head was a 25 pounds mild steel practice head. Once the rocket had been mounted on the rails, an electrical lead was plugged into the exhaust of the rocket. 4 large tail fins induced enough spin to stabilize the rocket, but as it was unguided, aiming was a matter of judgment and experience. approach to the target needed to be precise, with no side-slip or yaw, which could throw the RP offline. Aircraft speed had to be precise at the moment of launch, and the angle of attack required precision. Trajectory drop was also a problem, especially at longer ranges. On the plus side, the rocket was less complicated and more reliable than a gun firing a shell, and there was no recoil on firing. It was found to be a demoralizing form of attack against ground troops, and the 60 pounds warhead could be devastating. The rocket installations were light enough to be carried by single-seat fighters, giving them the punch of a cruiser. Against slow-moving large targets like shipping and U-boats, the rocket was a formidable weapon. The weight and drag of the all-steel rails initially fitted to British aircraft blunted performance. Some aircraft such as the Fairey Swordfish had steel anti-blast panels fitted under the rails to protect the wing, which further increased weight and drag. Aluminium Mark III rails, introduced from late 1944, reduced the effect. American experience with their own rockets and the USN's 5-inch FFAR and AMP HVAR showed that the long rails and anti-blast panels were unnecessary. Zero-length launchers were introduced in May 1945. British aircraft started being fitted with zero-point mounting pylons in the post-war years. The 3-inch rocket motors were used in the bunker-buster Disney bomb, 19 of them propelling the 4,500 pounds bomb to 990 miles per hour at impact with the target. Use in battle. Air-to-ground use. Before the new weapon was released for service, extensive tests were carried out by the Instrument, Armament and Defence Flight at Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough. Hurricanes were fitted with rockets and rails and flown during June and July 1942. Further tests were undertaken from the 28th of September to the 30th of November to develop rocket firing tactics. Other aircraft used were a Hudson, a Swordfish, a Boston II and a Sea Hurricane. At the same time, the Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment had to develop tactics for all the individual aircraft types which were to be armed with the RPs. Aiming was through a standard GM. 2 reflector gun sight. A later modification enabled the reflector to be tilted with the aid of a graduated scale, depressing the line of sight. The GM-IIL for rockets only. The MKIIA was the most successful. It was used on the Ventura and Hudson. The first operational use of the RP was in the Western Desert as a tank-busting weapon on Hawker Hurricane Mk. IIEs and IVs. The 25 pounds armour-piercing heads were found to be ineffective against the Tiger I tanks coming into German service, with the example of the success of Royal Artillery gunners using high-explosive shells from the 25 PDR gun howitzer. It was decided to design a new 60-pound semi-armour-piercing head. These were capable of knocking turrets off tanks. A typical RP-3 installation was 4 projectiles on launching rails under each wing. A selector switch was fitted to allow the pilot to fire them singly, in pairs, or as a full salvo. Towards the end of the war, some RAF 2nd Tactical Air Force Hawker Typhoons had their installation adapted to carry an additional 4 rockets, doubled up under the 8 already fitted. Possibly the best-known action involving RP-3s was that of the Falaise Pocket of mid-August 1944. During the battle, German forces, retreating to avoid being trapped in a pincer movement by Allied ground forces, came under air attack. Amongst the waves of light, medium and fighter bombers attacking the German columns, the Typhoons of 2 TAF attacked with the rockets, claiming hundreds of tanks and mechanized enemy transport. After the battle, Army and 2nd TAF operational research sections studying the battleground came to the conclusion that far fewer vehicles had been destroyed by rocket strike alone. What was clear was that in the heat of battle it was far harder for pilots to launch the weapons while meeting the conditions needed for accuracy. Smoke, dust and debris in the target areas made accurate assessment of the damage caused almost impossible. But it was also clear rocket attacks devastated the morale of enemy troops. Many vehicles were found abandoned intact, or with only superficial damage. Interrogation of captured prisoners showed that even the prospect of rocket attack was extremely unnerving for them. Anti-submarine. Soon after some encouraging results from the initial deployment, trials of the weapon were conducted against targets representing U-boats. It was discovered that if the rockets were fired at a shallow angle, near misses resulted in the rockets curving upwards in seawater and piercing the targets below the waterline. Soon Coastal Command and the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm aircraft were using the rockets extensively. The first U-boat destroyed with the assistance of a rocket attack was U-752 on May 23, 1943, by a Swordfish of 819 Rs. The rockets used on this occasion had solid, cast-iron heads and were known as rocket spears. One of these punched right through the submarine's pressure hull and rendered it incapable of diving. The U-boat was scuttled by its crew. On May 28, 1943, of 608 Squadron Hudson destroyed a U-boat in the Mediterranean, the first destroyed solely by rocket. These rockets were, among other factors, credited with making it too dangerous for the Germans to continue operating the flak U-boats, which were initially designed with heavy anti-aircraft weaponry to hold off air attacks. For then until the end of the Second World War in Europe, Coastal Command and the Fleet Air Arm used the rockets as one of the primary weapons against shipping and surface U-boats. Ground-to-ground use. RP-3 rockets were fired by British troops as part of artillery bombardments, e.g., during Operation Veritable in 1945. In 1945, some British Shermans were fitted with 2 rails, one either side of the turret, to carry 2 60-pound headed rockets. These were used at the Rhine crossing by tanks of the 1st Coldstream Guards. The tanks were called Sherman Tulips. The tanks fitted included both conventional Shermans and the more heavily armed Sherman Fireflies. The rockets were highly inaccurate when fired from a tank as they were being fired from a stationary point and had little slipstream over the fins. Despite this, the RP-3 was valued by tank crews for the destructive effect of its 60-pound warhead. Shore bombardment RP-3s were used to arm the landing craft rocket, also referred to as the landing craft tank to denote that it was a modified landing craft tank. These were used for shore bombardment during amphibious landings, particularly the invasion of Normandy, D-Day. LCTs carried 1,000 launches and 5,000 rockets. The firepower of one LCT was claimed to be equivalent to 80 light cruisers or 200 destroyers. The method of operation was to anchor off the target beach broadside to the shore. The range to the shore was then measured by radar and the elevation of the launches set accordingly. A crew then went below, with the exception of the commanding officer, who retreated to a special cubbyhole to control the firing. The launch could comprise either the entire set or individual ranks of rockets. A full reload was a very labor-intensive operation, and at least one LCT went alongside a cruiser and got a working party from the larger ship to assist in the process. Specification: length 55 in. Propelling charge 11 pounds, cordite, electrically ignited. Max speed 1,200 miles per hour. Range 1 mile. Weight 47 pounds with 25 pounds AP head. Warhead 60 pounds shell heat. SAP 60 pounds shell heat. GP hollow charge 18 pounds shell heat. 25 pounds shot tap. 25 pounds head. Solid AS 60 pounds shell. Practice 12 pounds head. Practice aircraft using the RP-3 in the Second World War. These are aircraft that used the RP-3 operationally. A number of aircraft types were fitted with RP-3s on an experimental basis. RAF and Commonwealth Air Forces Boeing Fortress Mk2 and II Bristol Beaufighter Mk Vic X-20. Consolidated Liberator B. Mk3 de Havilland Mosquito FB Mk Hawker Hurricane Mk Ian Amp IV Hawker Typhoon Mk Ib Republic Thunderbolt Vickers Wellington GRMK 14 Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm Fairy Firefly Mk Fairy Swordfish Mk 2 3 Grumman Tarpon Avenger Mk I 3 Post WW2. The 3 inches RP continued to be used on RAF and RN aircraft in the ground attack role until replaced by the SNEB podded rocket and the 2 inches podded RP. Aircraft types included Royal Navy Hawker Sea Fury and Seahawk, Supermarine Attacker and Scimitar. RAF Bristol Brigand, de Havilland Hornet, de Havilland Vampire and de Havilland Venom, Gloucester Meteor, and the Hawker Hunter. Operational use included the Malayan Emergency, the Korean War, the Suez Crisis, and the Radfan Campaign.